Here's why we're about to sit down with a graphite company. Now, the company is Northern Graphite. They are the third largest non-Chinese graphite producer in the world and the only graphite producer in North America. And the reason that is significant is because as the world continues to transition to renewable energy, I get it. The argument against solar and wind and all these sort of incoming renewables right now is that they're not baseload. And that's why I'm looking at uranium and nuclear. But not being baseload for something like solar and wind, that's just an innovation problem that will eventually be solved. When battery technology gets up to speed, it will put solar and wind and all of these incoming renewable energy sources at baseload equivalent because of their ability to store energy efficiently and cheaply for prolonged periods of time. It's coming. Absolutely, it's coming. It's just an innovation puzzle that will be solved. But until it's solved, it's very difficult to know how to play that game because the metals involved in battery manufacturing are very obscure and variable, right? We don't know who's going to win the battery race. We just don't. And so I don't know with confidence if I should bet on lithium, magnesium, vanadium, cobalt. It's tough to tell, right? But there's a few metals that are constant denominators, right? For example, if you want to play the energy trade from a metal standpoint, copper is your best bet because it's the best conductor in the world. And no matter what occurs, it's not going anywhere. Graphite is similar in the battery landscape. Often plus 50% of the metals in demand for general battery manufacturing is graphite. And so if you're looking at one common denominator, one most consistent ingredient that won't be so subject to engineering modifications that determine more or less of this metal or that metal, graphite's a good place to look. And importantly, sourcing graphite in the future, just like our oil, gas, uranium, all of this stuff is going to become increasingly a matter of national security. And so having a home supply, right, within the continent is going to be increasingly critical. Northern Graphite, they're doing it. All right. Anyways, here they are. I've had them on many times, but this is the new CEO, Hugues Jacquemin. I love the name. Hope you enjoy this interview.
This is Jay Martin.
All right, welcome back. This is Jay Martin, and I'm joined right now by Hugues Jacquemin, the CEO and president of Northern Graphite. Northern is a story that we've had on the show a handful of times, but Hugues, this is your first time since taking the CEO seat, so I'm excited to get to know you a little bit.
Yeah, it's great to be here, Jay. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. And there's a few different directions I want to go, but I want to start with an update on the graphite sector because energy right now is captivating everybody's attention because of the crisis in Europe. People are concerned about where energy is going to come from. And the trend and the transition to renewable energy is front and center. Talk to me about basic supply and demand economics today in relation to the graphite sector.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. Today, most of the graphite in the world is being produced and used in Asia, in China. And so, whatever is happening from a geopolitical point of view always has a huge impact on what's happening to the market itself. And we're living in very interesting times because we are now starting to see unprecedented demand for material, which is being driven by the electric vehicle. Because in the electric vehicle, you have a lithium-ion battery, and that lithium-ion battery is made up at about 40% of graphite material. Some of that is natural graphite, some of that is synthetic graphite. Usually they use a blend of the two materials. But until a couple of years ago, most of that material was available. It was produced and sourced in China. But what we are now seeing is that, the demand for EVs has driven such a high demand for graphite that whatever was available in China is becoming more unavailable. And therefore, there is a lot of demand that is coming into other regions, such as Europe and US. And therefore, it's quite interesting to see how that whole market is changing. Now, at the same time, when you look at graphite and you look at what is happening in Europe and US and the fact that both of those regions are declaring critical minerals, and graphite being one of those critical minerals.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that most of it is being sourced from China today, it's also creating a lot of demand of people who want to be able to source it from Europe and North America, but there isn't a lot of it available
No.
because, for example, we're the only ones who actually produce graphite out of a mine in North America. You have quite a lot of graphite being produced in Brazil. There's
Mm-hmm.
another company there who has 3 mines, and they produce quite a bit of graphite in Brazil. And then there is Sira that started a mine in Mozambique a couple of years ago, and they also produce material. They tend to ship actually quite a lot of their materials into China today, but they also have a plant in the US, and they're transforming that graphite, making anode material in Louisiana. So, there's a big change in the demand supply equation, and it's driving a lot of investment into the space, including ourselves. I mean, we just did the acquisition that we did because we wanted to respond to these demand scenarios that we could see coming down the pipeline. And, as Northern Graphite, we really see the market being short next year, probably about 40,000 tons. And, if you look at all the data coming out of people like Benchmark Minerals, that will only accelerate in an exponential manner. And therefore, we have to be able to get mines up and running quickly with quality materials so that we can meet that demand. And one of the things that I find really interesting is that, I've been in this business since 2014. I was at the time the CEO of Imerys Graphite and Carbon, and we could see at the time that every time the Chinese had excess capacity, they would then bring that product in at very low cost into Europe just to make up, the shortfall that they could see into China. And so you were very much subject to these cycles. But now the cycles are gone. Over the last 2 or 3 years, the line's been pretty straight on the upside, not exactly a hockey stick, but an upward line, and it's been stable that way for a few years now. And what has been happening in China is that initially they were making lithium-ion batteries out of natural graphite, and then they swapped the natural graphite for synthetic graphite. And so they built a lot of capacity of synthetic graphite material. But now they've actually gone back and they're now mixing the synthetic and the natural to get the right properties out of the battery, but they've also run out of synthetic graphite capacity. And so, all of the shortfall that has been happening in the last 2 or 3 years because of the demand of EV has been basically met by creating synthetic graphite capacity. Right. But today they've basically saturated that capacity. And so this is why, we will see much higher demand than supply over the years to come. And that demand's got to be satisfied with both synthetic and natural graphite. So huge investments are going to have to take place in order to be able to do that. Otherwise, people won't be able to buy electric vehicles because there won't be enough batteries out there to be able to produce them.
Okay, it's important also, I think, to recognize that electric vehicles are only one catalyst for growth. And it's the one that we focus on because it's front and center, and we're watching that transition in real time. But a couple of things within this, like it's the battery storage industry, the energy storage industry is what's creating this demand. And energy storage is going to continue to be more and more of a national security issue, I believe, moving into the future, because the crisis is energy, but energy is a whole bunch of things, including get the whole spectrum of new renewable sources to baseload equivalent. And that's going to require us to master energy storage. And the critical metals that are utilized right now, it's kind of a difficult industry to play, right? Because it's a new technology and batteries change, and there's a dozen different kinds. We don't know who's going to win that race yet. And so when you look at the metals involved, you've got, cobalt, lithium, manganese, vanadium, all these obscure metals, and each battery has a different formula. So the way I like to play this is go with the surest bets. So if you're betting on electrification, I like copper, right? Because it's the catalyst. If you're looking at energy storage, correct me if I'm wrong, but 50+% of the metals required, it's typically graphite, correct? Like it's not just the most. It's the
Yeah,
majority. It's over the
yeah.
majority. And so if you're going to pick one horse in the energy storage race in terms of the critical metals, graphite's far and wide the dominant metal. Is this correct?
It is. And what's really interesting is that not only is it dominant, but it's present in all the different chemistries. So whether you're
Yeah.
talking about
Yeah.
LFP,
Very
NMC,
important.
811, 532, whatever lithium ion battery you're trying to build, you need an anode, and that anode is predominantly made of graphite. You may
Right.
spike it with a little bit of silicone, you may grow nanowires on it, but it's predominantly graphite. And the way I like to explain it, it's actually electrification, but it's also more about electrochemistry, because the same applies to a fuel cell, right? So if you're looking at a fuel cell and you're looking at bipolar plates on a fuel cell, well, those bipolar plates are also made of graphite, right? So and when you think about fuel cell, you say, oh yeah, but the market is small, there are not so many. But look at what the world is spending on production of hydrogen, because producing hydrogen with renewable electricity is a way of storing electricity that you can then redeploy through electrochemistry using a fuel cell, right? So, and then you go and you say, okay, and if you do that, whether you're doing a lithium ion battery or you're doing a fuel cell, you're creating a lot of heat, and you're sending that heat somewhere. And actually, if you look at graphite, the other application that it's used for is how to dissipate heat, because it's one of the best conductor for heat that is available today. So that's also creating demand for that. So there is definitely the phenomenon of EV, which is driving the conversation everywhere. But you're totally correct. Energy storage, battery for energy storage, but also how to address the energy crisis by providing ways to store energy in whatever form it is, and to be able to restore that energy to the user using electrochemistry.
Yeah.
And that's really what it's all about,
It is.
And graphite plays a role in any kind of electrochemical application. So it's really a fundamental material to be able to provide that capability.
Yeah, which is why it's important to focus on, because if you're like me and I'm not an energy or an energy storage expert, it's not my forte, right? And so you gotta find a way to vet the opportunities and just migrate towards the surest bets, which is why I say copper and graphite. That's what I focus on, because it's the common denominator, right?
Yeah.
The least likely to be engineered out, you could say likely impossible. And to all the critics of renewable energy, I get it, right? Solar, wind, it's not base load, but that's a technology problem that will be solved. And when we solve it, that conversation's gone. And that's why I say energy storage is a matter of national security. I just believe it is, because there's pent up opportunities that will be realized when we can store the energy effectively, making wind, solar, baseload equivalent. And that's going to happen. And it's going to happen sooner than people think, probably. Anyways, let's talk about the supply a little bit, because a lot of the automobile sector, for example, has been making a bet that they're going to be able to continually access the graphite they need from China. That's quickly leaving the table. And so local supply is going to be very, very valuable. Now, you're set up to be the third largest non-Chinese graphite producer and the only graphite producer in North America. That's why I think Northern Graphite is worth a look. So walk me through the story, Hugues. Walk me through the assets in Quebec, Ontario, and Namibia. Where do you want to start today?
No, I mean, maybe very quickly, Northern Graphite was founded, 12 years ago around a deposit that is in Ontario called Bisset Creek, and has been spending that time basically getting that mine ready for financing and construction. And, when I met Greg a couple of years ago and we started working together, I said to him, we have to go faster. It's not fast enough. We have to go faster. It's all about going fast, because the market is there, and the first one that gets out with the material will win the race, And so he said, well, how do we do that? I said, well, we need to go buy some graphite mines that are producing so that we can get ahead of the curve, and we can create the customer base, the market understanding, the relationships that we need so that we can win this race and be a major player for the future. And so what we did is we basically approached Imerys, who was, who I worked for in the past, and we basically offered to buy their 2 graphite mines, which they basically decided were non-strategic to them because they focus more on the industrial mineral space. And basically we offered to buy the mines. And on April 29th, we went from being a junior company with a very nice project in Ontario to being the only producer of graphite in North America, and soon to be, as we restart the operations in Namibia sometime in the middle of next year, the 3rd largest in the world outside of China. But we still have our 2 big development projects, which we're working on in parallel. And our objective is to bring, today we have 15,000 tons of capacity that are being produced in Canada. We can increase that to 25,000 tons in that mine that's running today. We have a mine in Namibia that will restart early next year, and by mid-year we'll be producing about 30,000 tons. So if you add those 2 together, we have 50 to 55,000 tons of capacity. But then if you look at our 2 big development projects, the one in Namibia and the one in Bisset Creek, Ontario, and you add them to the 50,000 tons, we'll have 300,000 tons of capacity. Now, at 300,000 tons of capacity, we're probably 2 to 3 times larger than any of the other graphite producers that are there today, including the 2 companies that I mentioned before in Brazil and in Mozambique. We really jumped to the front of the queue. And so, and what's great about our projects is that they're very close to be able to be put in construction. I mean, the one in Ontario, we intend to go for financing at the end of this year and start construction next year. The one in Namibia is ready to go, and we are going to start the feasibility study, the PEA, this year. Next year we'll be moving into the financing of the project, and we expect to be in construction the year after next. So, we have a very clear path to how we can bring this capacity. But bringing the graphite capacity is not enough. We have to be able to also take that graphite and make it, let's say, electrochemically ready to be used in the battery. And in order to do that, we have to mill it, we have to shape it, we have to purify it, and we have to coat it. And so we're also working to partner with people who have technology know-how in that field, so that to the graphite assets and the graphite mine assets that we have, we can add those capabilities. But we are not only doing it in the battery space, we're also working with customers around the world that are supplying other industrial markets, and we're also bringing that capability to the table and trying to grow that market as well. Because when the graphite become, let's say, difficult to source, it will be like a tide. All of it will rise at once, whether it's a battery application or a non-battery application. And today, we're selling 15,000 tons a year out of the mine in Canada into non-battery applications mostly. And we have to support that customer base.
Yeah, it's worth noting you're in Cleveland right now visiting a non-battery client. Is that right? They've got, you said, 1,000 different SKUs they're using graphite for right now?
Yeah, so we are in Cleveland. We're visiting a customer of ours called Neograph, and what they do is they take our flakes and they basically make graphite foils and specialty graphite materials with our flakes. And it's fascinating to see all of the things that is happening in their customer base, because the electrification of the world is driving all of their applications, but they're also into construction, they're also into fire retardancy, and the sheer volume of application is staggering. Yeah, 1,000 SKUs is pretty conservative. I think it's probably more than that, but there's at least 1,000 SKUs. And this company, they're the old Union Carbide company, they used to be part of GrafTech, and they were spun off a few years ago. And it's really fascinating to see a company that's 130 years old, that is using our material and has completely transformed itself from, making gasket for combustion engines to making very sophisticated materials to support, lithium-ion battery integration into the vehicles. And that's what that's what this industry is about. It's not just about batteries. There's a lot of applications that graphite go into, and we have to be able to bring the material to the market so that all these companies can continue to profit and flourish. And so we have a responsibility to bring this capacity online as quickly as possible, and to be first at the gate, when the real demand kicks off in a couple of years.
I like that. I like the expeditious approach, Hugues. I do. So restating some of what I heard, we've touched on the LDI mine in Quebec that's currently producing 15,000 tons per year. That's hitting the market. North American, Canadian mine, great jurisdiction, predictable, safe, just governance. That's what we want in a jurisdiction these days. You touched on the mine in Namibia. Correct me if I heard this incorrectly, but you're going to be back online in 2023, and that will be producing about 30,000 tons.
That's correct.
Okay, and then we've got the development projects. The one I'm most familiar with is Bissett Creek in Ontario, because that's what Greg used to come on and talk about last year. So the feasibility is completed. It's worth noting that unless this has changed, and you tell me, the Bissett Creek deposit at present is forecasted to be the highest margin graphite deposit in the world. Is this still the case?
Yeah, because the reason it is that way is because, the way you can, let's say, mine that graphite and process it, and the type of flakes that you get allow you to position yourself in the highest margin products out there. And therefore, it's a great project. Even though, the carbon content is not as high as it is in Lac des Îles or in Namibia, the material, allows for very high margins. And it's a great project. So we're going to go ahead and finance it. And now is the time to do it, because the demand supply scenarios are completely different from what they were, a couple of years ago. And the great thing about it is we now have, over 100 people in the company that understand how to mine and process graphite, and we can bring them onto those projects and leverage the acquisitions you did to go faster and to ensure that we're successful. We're not just trying to hire an engineering company and build a mine. We've got 100 people that work every day in the mining of graphite and the processing of graphite, and they're all available to help us develop this project.
Yeah. Okay. And proximity is great. I think you're 17 kilometers away from a national highway, being the Trans-Canada, close to North Bay, close to Ottawa. So distribution will be cheaper, and getting the infrastructure, well, it already exists. I like that. What can we expect next, Hugues, in terms of near-term news flow? So talk to somebody who's just hearing this story for the first time. They're curious, but what can we expect in terms of near-term news catalysts? Keep in mind, my audience, they're like me, retail investors. What we really want to know is what's going to make the share price go up. So thinking through the next 6, 12 months, what can we expect in terms of material news?
Yeah, in terms of catalysts, of course, we are intent to talk about our downstream strategy, during the third and the fourth quarter of this year. So, you should expect news as to what it is that we want to do in order to not only produce and process the graphite at the mine, but also get closer to the customer. And do we do that with a partnership? Do we do that through an acquisition? Do we do that, developing a new greenfield site with a partner? We intend to be talking about that over the next 2 quarters. The other set of news is, keep an eye out when we restart the plant in Namibia. We're forecasting to be out there mid of next year. And you should really keep an eye. We're going to continue to put updates out there to let people know where we are. We recently put a PA out there on the project. It has a great return. I invite your investors to go take a look at that document. It's got a lot of detail. We also published our Q2 interim results a week and a half ago. I also invite your investors to go take a look at that. There's a lot of great information about cost, volume, pricing, customers, how the projects are going, and so on and so on. And what we want to do is continue to communicate on the projects that we have. So for sure, Namibia is one. Then there's a Muso West. We put a press release out there that we took an option 6 months ago on a deposit very close to Lac des Îles to extend the life of Lac des Îles, but also to increase the capacity. we put another press release recently that we decided that we were going to exercise that option. So keep an eye out there. So when the option gets exercised, which should be quite shortly, and then keep an eye out on how that project is going, because once we exercise the option, then we have to basically start integrating that deposit into the Lac des Îles deposit. And then look out for the financing of Biscuit Creek. We will start raising money to do that sometime at the end of this year, and look out for the PEA on the big Namibian project, which will be our next round of financing that we want to start doing next year. So those are the key items to keep an eye on.
There's a few. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
We are really busy. We are really busy, but also we are now 100 people. That makes a big difference. I mean, we went from, on April 29th, we basically had one employee, and today we're over 100 people. So having the people really helps in executing, and it really helps in the speed of execution, and having the knowledge and having the customer base and the link to the markets and the pricing in the market, also really helps. And that was the objective. And I think, our share price is really a bargain right now. If you look at all of what we're doing, and if you compare us to all the graphite companies out there, our share price should be 2 to 3 times what it is today. But okay, we have to work hard. We have to continue to communicate, and it will come. And, I would also like to point out that when we did the transaction and we closed on the April 29th, we did it with financing to be able to go all the way through the restart of Namibia. So in order to restart Namibia, and we don't need to raise any more money. That money is already being spent and being invested. So the next round of financing for us will really come when we start talking about Biscuit Creek, but that's a completely new project. And meanwhile, we'll be producing and selling graphite and generating cash out of both of the Lac des Îles operation and the Namibian operation. And that's really important for investors. We're not burning cash. We're actually generating cash, and that cash is helping us pay for all the SG&A that we need. But it's not, let's say, it's not costing us more today to run the SG&A in the company than what we are actually producing in terms of revenue and cash out of a Lac des Îles operation. And once Namibia starts, we'll have even more funds available to be able to continue to invest in the business, right?
Yeah, because your output's going to quadruple once that.
That's right.
Production. Yeah. Okay. So that's what we can look forward to, is restarting that production in Namibia. An update on Biscuit Creek. I'm glad you mentioned Muso West.
Muso West.
Muso West, which is essentially expanding the resource of the LDA mine in Quebec, correct?
Yeah, because the LDI mine, it started in the 90s, and we've basically mined a lot of different pits around the mine. The current pit that is in operation, called Pit 2, still has about 2 to 2.5 years of life into it, but we needed to be able to find another deposit close by that we could bring online in order to extend the life of the mine. But also we wanted to increase capacity, because today we're producing 15,000 tons because we're running the plants 5 days a week. But by running the plant 7 days a week and having a larger deposit available, then we can ramp that up all the way to 25,000 tons. And so the Muso West deposit allows us to do that. Now we have to juggle a few things, but as that comes online, it's really going to bring some value, because it will allow us to continue to operate that plant. The plant's in great shape, just needs more graphite, and that's why we intend to exercise that option and to start developing that mine site.
Okay, I love it, Hugues. Look, this has been great. I'm really glad you can find the time to come on today while you're out there visiting clients, but I appreciate it. Great to get to know you.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate it too. And, I look forward to providing you more updates in the future. And I hope your investors will will buy our shares, and we continue to provide value to our employees and to our shareholders and to all the stakeholders, and support the electrification of the world and the critical mineral space.
I love it. Okay, well, look forward to getting you back on, later this year, early next year, and getting an update on all the buckets that we discussed today. So thanks again. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Jay. Have a great day.